these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, folks. Greatest podcast ever. And of course, by now, you've probably given it 5 stars already. I don't know why you wouldn't. But we have a really special guest with us today, Andy Stumpf. And you might have heard from him. He has the second greatest podcast ever. And also, I don't think you probably know this, he put me through BUD/S. He was my second phase instructor, but also Proctor, which we'll get into what that actually means. All around great guy, does a lot of great things still outside of the SEAL teams. And we've maintained in close contact ever since. I believe Andy will often say about me, even though he was my instructor, I was a bit of a hero of his. Isn't that right, Andy?
I don't know if I've ever used those terms or those words ever associated with you. I think you may have said them about me. It's written them.
May have written them. Did you force me to write them? Did you threaten me and then make me write?
Sure. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what
it kind of matters.
May have been under at the time. Oh man, yeah, we've known each other for quite some time, for sure.
And so, today I want to go into, I think we should shoot a little bit about our history, but we've been trying to plan this for a while. We've been planning to schedule this for a little while now, and I reached out to you yesterday because I'm like, look, let's just get this done, especially with everything going on in Afghanistan. You've done multiple deployments there. You've got opinions on it, and I kind of want to work through those opinions. I want to see where we agree and disagree. I think most veterans kind of come out around the same place. From what I've seen. But there's just a lot more to unpack here than the general public realizes, and that's been the case for a long time. I'm very frustrated with how we've oversimplified the situations in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and these so-called endless wars. I'm frustrated by that from a public policy standpoint, and so we're going to unpack that. But first, what is a proctor? Help us understand that. What is a second phase instructor proctor, and why did you call our class a bunch of turds and then quit on us?
I never quit on you guys. Actually, if I did, that
you
was
resigned. You resigned temporarily. You were so mad at us. I can't even remember what we did.
I can't either. And let's be honest, it's a tactic that I sometimes have to use with my kids, right? It's all about connecting with your audience. You have to figure out, is it going to be the hammer of justice that gets them to do stuff? Or do you have to be the disappointed parent that says, I actually can't be around you guys anymore because you disgust me? And that's what worked well with your class. I mean, maybe it had something to do with the leadership. It's hard to say. But okay, so a proctor. For people, I don't know how much we talked about this because you and I, we did a podcast actually on my show as well. So if people are curious about our relationship, they can go back and listen to that. We chatted for a few hours on anything we may miss today. But BUD/S is 3 phases long. There's a pre-phase. I don't know if they necessarily count that as an official one, but there's an instructor cadre. And of course, it's the military, so it is a rank-driven organization. So for you, the class going through, the class has an OIC because they're a mix of enlisted and officer. And on the instructor side of the house, instead of the class leader coming and talking to a variety of instructors, what they do is they designate one point of contact that is, what would be in Boy Scout terms, the den leader, whatever term you would want to reduce it down to. But
you're a den leader.
Correct. Yeah, it would be more appropriate for the Girl Scouts, though. I don't know what they call it, the cookie leader or whatever it is. That's, so in each phase,
there's a lot of hand holding. There's a lot of hugging that occurs.
So much, yes. So in every phase, they assign an instructor. So in first phase, I'm not sure who your proctor was, but I did a turnover. Actually, it might have been Dan Fowles, I think. But we did a turnover, and they kind of read me in on the class, the rank structure, kind of the top 5 performers, the bottom 5 performers. And more than anything, it's an administrative role. You guys would come to me for, the schedule and information specifically on what's going on. And then I could come to you because you were the class OIC. and interface, and just, it's a single point of communication, because I think there was 15 second phase instructors, and how many guys were in your class? It was 60, 70, 80, something like that.
It sounds about right. Right.
It would be impossible to try to have good communication absent those 2 point of contact. So that's really all it is. And it shifts. You do one class, you see them from the first day to the end, and then you kind of just rotate through. On the Proctor side, it has nothing to do with rank. It kind of just has to do with where you are in the line. And that's really the role. The class is your responsibility. If the other instructors have questions about the class or what's going on, they came to me as opposed to a random member of your class. And it's an important part of the architecture there, because it truly helps the communication in the classes to seamlessly go through the phases.
So you were a particularly interesting instructor to us because you just come back from a deployment, or you had just been healing up from an injury on a deployment where you got shot in Iraq, I believe. And it's not like you got lost an eye or anything. So you were, to be honest, you were kind of complaining a lot about your injury. Again, it's like, I don't know what the big problem was, but
Fair. We covered this on the podcast we previously did. I have had PRK, so I know your pain. I understand what it's like to have an injury.
I got hit with shrapnel once, so I know your pain. I got
hit with a laser. I got hit with a laser in my eye, so I know your pain.
Ugh. Actually, that's kind of terrifying, to be honest.
The worst part of PRK is you have to watch it happen.
That's true, because I've gotten PRK too. But anyway, you were coming off some pretty interesting experiences. You had been at, I believe, Blue Squadron, Gold before that,
yep.
And which is development group, whatever. It's nobody. Everybody calls it SEAL Team 6. Yeah. Everybody calls it SEAL Team 6 now.
Just go and have fun. Don't spend too much time.
And so you were back. And oftentimes in the SEAL teams, coming back to be a BUDS instructor is a bit of a break, especially if you've just been shot, for instance. And that's often the kind of guys that come through. I mean, you're coming through after a couple deployments, or many more than that. And so you had a lot to tell us. You had a lot of experience to give us. And before that, you'd been to Afghanistan already, I believe.
3 times.
3 times before 2007, or just total 3 times?
I was in Afghanistan in 2002, 2003, 2004, and then back in 2010. So it was 3 of the 4 times I had been there had already occurred.
Right. I guess let's just get into it. How? Because I've only been once. You've been 3 times. I mean, how did it change over time? And, and each time we went, what was the kind of frustration going through your head with the strategic mission given to us and how that actually played out on the ground? How could it have been communicated different? Or did you even think about that stuff? Because to be honest, I'm not sure a lot of guys did. We were just kind of happy to be out and fighting for our country.
Yeah, I mean, God, I don't know if there's enough storage device on any medium to truly capture how much time it would take for me to explain how I feel, because you described it in the beginning, I think, very correctly. And I think it's something that is lost the complexity of it. Not only for you and I, I'm not an expert in Afghanistan. And that's one thing that I wish people would realize is just because you had your boots on the ground in Afghanistan, it doesn't make you an expert in the country. I'm not an expert in the geopolitics or the policy or anything that happened above a tactical level. I can tell you about the different provinces that I've been to, the differences between the RC North, South, East, and West. There's everything from the Hindu Kush to Star Wars type, deserts there and everything in between. I can tell you about the partner force that I worked with a lot, the ANA and the AMP, and a little bit of the partner force I worked with when I was at Development Group. I can tell you about some of the people and some of the culture, but I see so many people getting up on their soapbox trying to talk about the country and what has happened there and what's happening there now as if they're some expert. And the reality is they're not. And I think that's one thing that's important for people to take pause is just because you wore the American flag on your uniform that you got issued for a bit, it doesn't make you an expert in everything, especially at things beyond the tactical level, unless you had multiple stars on your shoulders. And at that point anyway, I would say you're detached from it and you're in much more of a policy perspective. But it's like trying to describe what's going on now is like trying to watch a complicated situation unfold through a pinhole. and it's moving by really fast. You know, in the vets that I have talked to, and I mean, I haven't asked you this question directly, but in everybody that I have talked to, if you spent about 6 seconds with our partner force over there, you realize that what is happening now in Afghanistan was going to happen whenever the United States left. So let's say we had left 10 years ago, this still would have happened. Let's say we left 10 years from now, it still would have happened. And as soon as you interface
with a slightly less chance,
for sure.
but in the end, they don't have that kind of, which sounds crazy to people because they think of Afghanistan as this warrior culture, but the people we train with do not have the warrior culture. It is not like the American military. I mean, if you trained like South Korean SEALs, or it's a very different culture. Correct. They just don't have whatever it is we create in America, and I'm not sure what that is.
I'm not either, and I think it's important for people, you know, maybe to ponder if Afghanistan ever has been in its history what the West would want it to be, and if it's even capable for them to ever become what we would want them to be. My answer to that is no, they never have been and they never will be. And to say we had left 10 years before now, it probably would have been easier from a logistical perspective, and maybe we wouldn't have left as much stuff behind. And maybe 10 years from now, it would have been even more complex. But bottom line, the country, at least in my opinion, was going to funnel on itself because they didn't have the ability to stand up for themselves in the way that you and I are conditioned through our military service to think that a soldier should behave. And I know that that won't be understood by a lot of people, and I apologize that I don't have a better explanation for it. But literally, I have not talked to a single veteran that served there that is surprised by what happened. They are surprised by the velocity with which it happened, but not the end state in and of itself.
And I think I think that is a point that most of us agree on, which is. But then the question becomes, okay, so then what do you do? And this is what's been driving everybody crazy. And what's been driving me crazy, again, is the oversimplification of it. It seems to me that the American public has believed that there's only two options. Either we pull out, we bring the troops home, you know, and we make ourselves feel good because that slogan makes us feel good. Bring the troops home. We're going to protect guys like you, protect guys like me. I always say, I don't need your damn protection. We're all volunteer force. It's not why I went over there. And I get very frustrated by that sort of moral superiority argument. But it does seem to me that people think it was either that or nation building. And the truth is there's a lot in between. There's a lot of options in between those two rather extreme options. And as far as what I've been advocating for years now is that in-between option. In my mind, we found a good stalemate. We found a good in-between at a very low cost. We were keeping some sort of stabilization in a place like Afghanistan. And at the very least, offering a strategic objective of denying a full-on terrorist safe haven. To me, that seems like a good deal, you know, because a lot of veterans are asking, what the hell was my service for? What did I even do this for? Was it all a waste? And I'm like, no, it was not a waste, because you know what we got for the last 20 years? No more 9/11s. That's what we got. And that seems like a pretty good deal. Now, did we oftentimes maybe expend too much blood and treasure just to meet that objective? It would seem in hindsight that that's probably true. In hindsight.
Well, it's a hypothesis, right? Because we don't know what would have happened if we had left 10 years ago. No. And we don't know what the cost would be if we had stayed for another 10 years. And I have heard a lot of vets talking about, you know, the service being in vain. And again, this is where I would say to those veterans, you need to take a minute and realize that our involvement in Afghanistan was never actually supposed to be saving Afghanistan from itself.
It was a reaction to an attack on us.
It was a reaction to an attack. And when I went over there in 2002 and 3 and 4, we were trying to find, fix, and finish the individuals that had planned for the attacks on 9/11, as you described, deny them the terrain to be able to recruit or train or plan or whatever it may be that might express in an attack outside of that country. And it wasn't until much later on, I would say the deployment in 2010, where things shifted drastically. The ROEs were different. The guidance was different. And the overall goal seemed to be different. I mean, it was very clear to me in the early years of Afghanistan that we weren't there for nation building. I didn't hear that term until back in 2010. And in my opinion, the United States government, specifically the DOD, were not good at nation building. But for the vets who are thinking like, hey, I served for nothing, you absolutely didn't. What is happening now in Afghanistan was going to happen. And it was never our job to go there and to build Afghanistan into something that we thought it was going to be. We went there for the reasons that both you and I have already described. And like you said, in 20 years, we haven't had an attack like the one that we did. It absolutely was not in vain. And if Afghanistan cannot stand on its own 2 feet, that doesn't mean that they served in vain. Those two things have to be very disconnected, but I think they can be very convoluted, especially if it's just complete bombardment on every social media platform, on every news network. Look at what's happening. It's falling apart. And I think it's really easy to connect what's happening to that country in a bigger picture. Again, I hate the term, but it's applicable, boots on the ground. They're very different things.
Yeah, I think that's all true. And the question I have for people, like the people who just want to, who kind of operate in this sort of shattered worldview, and there's a lot of Americans on the left and the right. What's frustrating me about the dichotomy of thinking on this particular issue is that it's been wrongful thinking on that is bipartisan. It has been shared by the left and the right. Everybody seemed to want to repeat the slogans of, no more endless wars. Let's reduce this complex foreign policy situation into a slogan. This has frustrated me to no ends, and I've taken a lot of aim at that crowd over the last week because I don't see how they can criticize Biden. I don't see how. I mean, we can criticize him for how he did it. He definitely did it in an extremely hasty and inappropriate manner. Yeah, we left a lot of equipment behind, but people don't realize that wasn't by accident. That was on purpose. We were that was there for the Afghan National Army. We just didn't expect them to fall so quickly. Again, to your point, we should have expected it. It was, and they're not. It's not totally their fault. They've been around as an organization for less than 20 years. That's not a lot of time in the grand timeline of history to really build a culture. They don't have our logistical support anymore. They don't have our air support. We made these decisions rather quickly, and you're dealing with an enemy that does not fight conventionally. They're dealing with an enemy that hides among civilian populations, that is willing to use IEDs to get you. It's a very different kind of warfare, and so I want to give a little bit of grace to our allies there. They've fought a lot. They've tens of thousands of them have died fighting, and they continue to fight. But they needed just a minimal amount of backup from us. When we talk about costs, we did find that balance, I think, in the last few years. We had very minimal cost, a few thousand troops. We had KIA in the field about an average of 6 to 7 soldiers since 2014. We've had 0 casualties in the last 18 months. And so, I asked people, I'm like, look, if this has to be about costs and benefits, because if we all agree that we should have gone in and done something about 9/11, and I think everybody agrees, even Biden voted for that AUMF. And it was a righteous war. So we all agree on that. And then you have to show a little bit of grace for our decision makers who were there day after day. So, okay, what do we do now? Because if we just pull out, it seemed obvious at every moment that Taliban would just take over and we'd return to a pre-9/11 situation where you'd have a terrorist safe haven and you're now at risk. And so is that a superior outcome to just leaving? And that was always the question. That's been the question every single day since 9/11, since we occupied Afghanistan. And for people to just assume that that's an easy question to answer is just so frustrating. And people have gotten so emotional about it, which has frustrated me and made me emotional, I suppose. This is about as emotional as I can get. But in any case, it's just never been that simple. And so people are like, well, how long would you stay, Dan? And I'm like, you know what? When the cost-benefit ratio makes more sense. When the cost of leaving is less than the cost of staying. That's when I'll leave. Because right now, if we're looking at what's happening right now, it seems to me that the cost of leaving is huge. I mean, everybody seems to agree on that now. And the cost of staying, compared to our situation just a few weeks ago of stability and an Afghan government that was still our ally, and we had a few thousand people there. We hadn't lost a single soldier in 18 months. I don't know. That seems like a good deal. South Korea didn't have an election until the 80s. We occupied South Korea until they didn't have a democratic election until the 80s. People don't realize that when America commits in the long run, it works. It takes time, though. It takes time even in these industrialized civilizations. I don't think Afghanistan ever has a hope of turning into South Korea. Don't get me wrong, but it was stable and we were preventing terrorism. And now it seems like everybody agrees across the spectrum that this will certainly be a safe haven for people like ISIS and Al Qaeda. I don't know. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, you hear the comparisons between Europe and Korea, or the places that the United States has had establishments, at least from remote-based perspectives since the 40s. And it's at a high level, it's a good comparison, but at a specific level, I think it's tough because we weren't involved in any combat operations in Europe and Korea post the end of those wars. And our involvement, in kinetic operations, whether it's by, with, and through, or directly, or air support, whatever it may be. The 20 years we've been in Afghanistan far exceeds any amount of time for combat operations in the Korean Peninsula or Europe. So there's some good similarities and there's some poor ones. I think, you mentioned it. Afghanistan is Afghanistan. It is hard to describe the culture, the origins and inception of that country, the warfare that has been ongoing there generationally. They tell time differently than Westerners do. Not in the 24-hour perspective, but I'm talking generational memory, where it seems like in the United States we have a memory of the next, Instagram feed that you scroll through. Like I said, I agree with the decision that we needed to leave that country, but at the same time, like you and I are talking about, we knew that, again, after working with the partner force there, that it was probably very likely, if not a certainty, that this was likely going to happen. If you're going to leave, execute the strategy. Like I would plan for the worst case scenario. That's the way that you and I were taught to plan, right? Let's look at the most deadly course of action, the most likely course of action, and our plan needs to encompass all of that. And I look at what's going on now, and it's like, really, like, this is the best that we can do. Like, this is the best plan that we have that's stranding tens of thousands of people. I have some friends at some tier 1 units now that are getting spun up to potentially be sent over there in the case there needs to be hostage rescue type situations or to recover people. And this is where, to me, it's very easy to look at the last few weeks and judge the person that's in the seat right now in the Oval Office, and you absolutely should. I think, if you're in charge and you are executing a plan and you've had, let's be honest, he's been in office for 6 months, right? So I don't know how much hand he's had in the plan, but if it goes to and you don't audible and you don't change the plan and you don't take the time to find a better plan or, do the things that are necessary, you own that 100%. And you should absolutely.
Especially because the Taliban were blowing past the agreement. They were blowing past it in every sense. The act of taking over capitals.
Let's be honest. Should that be a shock to anybody? No. So there's.
But you should at least reassess the negotiations at that point.
Of course. That's what I'm saying. As soon as you get into the seat, if you realize that the plan that your predecessor put into place was and it's not going to work, you are now in charge, and it is your obligation to fix that.
You don't get to blame Trump for this one.
Correct.
And also, Trump ended the negotiations.
Yeah,
they had agreed to a conditions-based withdrawal.
And here's the thing, right? So there's what's going on now, and then there's everything that's happened in the 20 years of our occupation in this country. And then let's go back even farther when we first started having involvement in the country, whether it's a proxy war against the Soviet Union, right? Like, it's not like this is not the first time that the U.S. has had its hands in Afghanistan. So what's happening now should be viewed very critically, but I also don't want people to lose perspective of what happened in the other 19 and a half years in the involvement in this country. I think that the policymakers writ large, they need to be held accountable as well. There's so many lessons that I think we can learn from as a country to hopefully not repeat into the future, because that seems to be our only option at this point. It's not like we're going to go back and hit a redo on Afghanistan. So if we're just going to gloss over everything that led us to this point and only focus on what's happening right now, which we absolutely should focus on that, I just hope that those lessons learned and all the things that happened previously aren't lost, then we're going to end up doing the again. Not the same, if you don't study your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
I think so many people just disagree on what the lessons are. We don't seem to be doing a lot of really objective introspection. Because it would have been easy to look at the situation in Iraq in 2011 and say, look, we knew that would happen because all the bad guys were hiding out in Syria, and it seems stable now. It looked like nation building. It actually kind of worked, at least to the best that it can in a place in the Middle East. It kind of worked in Iraq, and Obama and Biden wanted to leave, and so they left. And those of us on the ground because I was on the ground in 2011 in Iraq. I knew this would be a bad idea. Again, it seemed relatively stable at the time, but we also knew that all the bad guys we were tracking were just over the border in Syria. And, of course, they came through, and the rest is history, right? ISIS came through and took over Iraq, and we had to go back in and deal with that. I think everybody in the military was saying the same thing about Afghanistan. Biden was advised to keep at least that 2,500 troops there. I think military professionals would probably prefer closer to 10,000. And people are like, well, that's an endless war. And I'm like, can we stop labeling it? What it is it's a stabilizing force. Call it a peacekeeping mission. But we're not really in heavy combat. Like, this just people just don't understand what we're doing over there anymore. It is not like it was in 2012. It is just not. And people need to understand that.
When I was there in 2, 3, and 4, it had shifted in 2010 to something that was completely different. And that, from my understanding and talking to people still going over there, that evolution continued. I agree with you. You could call it whatever you wanted to. And also, let's take a less myopic view of the world in general and the United States in general. Like, we're in an endless war.
Yes. We don't have a choice.
Correct. And it doesn't have a geographical border. It could be an intellectual endless war, a conceptual. I mean, the people out there who are at their core level the antithesis of what we believe, they're still out there. I mean, the last stat that I saw, I think it was the U.S. Special Operations Forces has a footprint in like 104 countries, something like that.
Yeah.
Like,
it's huge.
Strap in, people. We're in an endless war. Afghanistan is one piece of a puzzle that is an order of magnitude greater than what's going on in just that country. So, label it whatever you want to or bury your head in the sand. It doesn't change the reality.
Can't say that word on my podcast, Andy.
Well, you
it's all right. SEALs, they're the worst. Anyway,
again,
but you're absolutely right.
That's about as emotional as I can get too, and sometimes you have to use the big boy words that you only learned in college.
Yeah,
so
you're absolutely. I'm just screwing with you. You're absolutely right. We'll just leave it out. Well, I don't like to. We don't edit these things out. But you're absolutely right, and I've said this before. I wrote it in my op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. It was we didn't lose a war, we didn't even end a war, because the war never ends. Because as it turns out, there's still people that want us dead, and Westerners have a really hard time understanding why this enemy wants us dead. Because it's like, we must have done something, right? That's always the reaction. It must have been our foreign policy. It must have been something we did. You have to understand that they hate Western civilization. They hate us for reasons that go beyond your comprehension. And you just have to accept that. That's the first thing you just have to accept. And a great example of that is Osama bin Laden. Because by way of our actions, our foreign policy actions, Osama bin Laden should have loved us. Right? We assisted him in the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 80s. We actually invaded Iraq to defend his home country of Saudi Arabia in 1991. It's unclear why this man hates us so much. He hates us because he hates us, right? And he ordered the attacks on the embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. He ordered the attacks on the USS Cole in 2000, and of course ordered the attacks on September 11th, and the rest is history. But he hates us because he hates us, and the people who have followed him hate us because they hate us. And it's an endless war because they wake up every day thinking about it, and the best we can do is at least be the hunters instead of the hunted. And I think people with this sort of myopic view of national security, where it's like, okay, I guess there's a bunch of SEALs on Coronado Beach with binoculars, like looking out over the horizon, making sure the Ruskies don't invade. That's not national defense. National defense is a web of alliances and forward deployed forces that can react to threats around the world, because it turns out the world is a very small place. That's been national security for a very long time, frankly. Yeah. And it just, for some reason, this makes people uncomfortable. And I wonder if this is just a failure of communication from our policymakers over time, over the last 20 years especially, because the way the public reacts to the sort of the slogans of endless wars is extremely emotional. People get very frustrated by it, and I think they've just been miscommunicated to for a very long time.
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from. And for people who say that they want to end an endless war, my question to them generally is, well, did you think that we were at war on September 10th, 2001? And they'll say, well, no, because we hadn't been attacked yet. And I will say to that, you are viewing it only from your side of the coin. If you looked at the other side of that coin, the people who were planning the September 11th attacks, who took the time to do so over years, guess what? They thought that they were at war with us because they were at war with us all that time. We just weren't, or you weren't paying attention. So whether you feel like we're in an endless war or your enemy does, again, you have to strap in, right? You can choose to bury your head in the sand and ignore the reality. And I see people being taught and conditioned that, you can't say or do anything that might be offensive to anybody else for any reason. And when that starts creeping into foreign policy, I don't know how that works.
You want to get into some woke military stuff? Is that what you're alluding to, or?
No, I mean, just in general, like, oh, we shouldn't be out around the world promoting American foreign policy. And I see some links to that being like, well, you shouldn't go out and say that you're proud of anything, or, you have to be careful what you say or what you do because you don't want to, offend anybody. But like, listen, the execution of American foreign policy, it's going to offend some people. The people who wake up every day and try to figure out a way to do damage to the United States of America or kill American citizens. Guess what? They're not going to like it. Sorry. So what do you want to do? Do you want to sit back and wait for them to attack and then be reactive? Or do you want to be out there and try to defend what it is that this country stands for? And then you get into the argument of, well, what does this country stand for? And I don't even have the tolerance to begin that one, because I think you and I align on the reasons why this country is great, the amazing opportunities that it provides people. And it's like, I just don't have the ability to have those conversations with people. But I see those ties between, people being taught, don't offend anybody, don't say anything. And I just don't know how that mental connection, they view American foreign policy and they think, well, we must be doing something that's wrong.
It's an interesting point, and which is this, that there's, especially in recent years, seems to have been this sort of lack of confidence in the American ideal. But by recent years, I mean like the last 70 years, frankly, like since the Vietnam era, which is when this feeling that America can't do any good, it doesn't deserve to be upheld as the shining city on the hill. That really started in the 60s and people's backlash towards Vietnam. Got a little bit better in the 80s when we won the Cold War and Reagan was, the eternal optimist and made Americans feel good about America again. But I think maybe we did have it too in the early 2000s at the start of these wars. But then we got right back into this sort of self-hatred and this kind of what we stand for. And and this manifests a little differently on the left and the right, but in the end they come to the same conclusion. See, on the right, I pay attention more to what the right says for obvious reasons, and because I'm in stark disagreement with this crowd on these particular issues, and what they tend to do is just sort of come up with these simplistic labels, like, oh, if you believe that we should have troops over there still, then you're a neoliberal or neocon internationalist. You're a globalist, right? They start to label things that they know sound bad because that's just how we do things in politics, right? You just tar and feather somebody.
You say magic words and they can't do anything back.
Right. Magic words. See, on the left, they call you a racist. On the right, they call you a neocon or a rhino or whatever it is. And it's just like, how about just use some brains? Let's just use some thought processes and maybe some conversation, because this stuff, especially with this stuff, it's so much more complicated than they want it to be. And they're
lead. So to take the people on the right, for example, who, and it's very interesting. I was talking to my dad about this recently. He's 30 plus some years older than I, and he was talking about how it's really interesting to see. It's not uncommon to see the left and the right arguing or disagreeing on things. But to him, he said one of the most interesting things he's seen in his lifetime is the left attacking the left and the right attacking the right for not being far enough to either side of the extreme. So for that person who says, hey, if you think we need to have a foreign presence overseas, you're a globalist, what do they actually think that we should be doing? And
what's the alternative?
Yeah, where does the road lead if we were? So it's like, okay, you're king for a day, so you get to make foreign policy. We'll pull everybody back. Where do they think that leads?
They'll say, just focus on home. And then my next question, okay, that's about as in-depth as the answer gets, by the way. And the next...
focus on home, but also can we multitask?
Yeah, exactly. That's my next question to them is, can you do both, right? Because you hear this like, we spent $88 billion training the Afghan army, and look what happened. We could have spent that at home. And conservatives say that. And my next question to them is, wait a second, I thought we already over budgeted at home. Right. I thought that was our argument. So like, how is that our argument? It doesn't make sense, guys. It's an emotional argument. Let's just be more careful with how we speak, please, because it's not as if that money, just especially with the way we spend money at the federal level, it's not as if that money was taken away from a program at home. And again, my problem with the programs at home isn't that we don't have enough money for them. It's that we spend too much money on programs that don't work and don't provide an outcome that we think is actually superior. In any case, let's not conflate the two issues just because we're trying to make an emotional argument. Let's make more reasonable and honest arguments. And I swear that's just the entire problem with this whole conversation. Is it's really packed full of emotion, more so than most issues, and a lot of issues have a lot of emotion.
Well, I mean, when you see people falling off of airplanes trying to take off, like it's going to elicit an emotional response. I get it, but emotions are not going to be how we navigate our way to a better place. And that's where it gets completely lost on me, because I see people escalate to that emotional level, and then the dribble that comes out of their mouth, I have a hard time trying to understand. And eventually I just stop trying to understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was told that they didn't want us there, which all the pictures of people trying to get on airplanes and risk their lives and basically die of heat exhaustion outside the gates of Kabul airport to try to get to America. It's complex. Some of us don't. Exactly.
Some of them are going to be celebrating in the streets. Some of them have very deep family ties to the Taliban. And again, instead of telling time with a watch or a sundial, they're watching decades flip by without a care in the world because they've seen this generationally. So good luck. In a place, like, people don't even understand the differences in the provinces and the cultural differences and the language differences in the Afghanistan country as a whole. Good luck trying to find a consensus on, they want us there or they don't. That is the most simplistic description to a ridiculously complex situation that I've ever heard. Some do, some don't, and everything in between.
What do you think realistic action should be for the next few weeks? I mean, we've got a self-imposed deadline of August 31st to get everybody out. I don't see how we meet that deadline. I think there's going to be people who need to get out and deserve to get out, deserve our help. I think the estimate is about 80,000 Afghans that have helped us that deserve SIV visas. A mix of interpreters, sources, contractors, these types of folks. There's still thousands of U.S. citizens who maybe weren't really clamoring to get out before. Again, I think everybody was taken by surprise a little bit on this, but they certainly are clamoring to get out now. They can't really make it to the gates. We know this for a fact. I'm very upset with this administration for claiming that people can make it to the gates if they want to. It's just not true. It's too chaotic of a situation. People are literally dying at the gates because they're getting crushed by the crowds. Taliban are beating people back. They're dying of heat exhaustion. There's a lot of problems. It's not safe to bring your family to the gates of Kabul necessarily. So, one of the things I've been pushing for, just tweeted it like a few minutes ago actually, was just authorize our forces to move a few hundred yards outside the gates and pick up people. Because, my office is working with specific individuals who contact us because they can't get in touch with the State Department. And we're just leading them to the right place. And then we've got soldiers on the ground that we're in contact with, guys I know, who we're making those connections happen. And it's the least it's the only thing we can do, and it's working. But their hands are tied in a sense because they have no authorization to even go into just move out a little bit further outside the perimeter. I don't know what you think about that. I don't know what you think about retaking Bagram. It's another thing. That's another option that's on the table.
What sucks the most is that I'm not talking about you. Well, maybe you, because you made the poor decision to enter into politics. So much more tied into this than I am. But what's going on right now? It's crisis management, right? So crisis planning is about the best that they're going to be able to do, which is not going to be the best plan. What I would have loved to have seen is to have those people that, the 80,000 people that you mentioned. Like, you're telling me as a country we couldn't have figured out a way to have all that stuff handled before we left? We couldn't have read the tea leaves of what had happened historically, or look at what happened in Iraq and what it appeared to be and the velocity with which it became different, and handle that up front, right, to avoid that crisis management. So that would be – I wish that we had done that, but we haven't. Okay, so let's look at the situation that we had now. You were military officer. I was a fake military officer, as we both know.
Oh, that's right. You went to the dark side because I'm your hero. Because I'm your hero. You're like, what can I do to be like Dan Crenshaw?
Correct.
And don't lie. You wear an eye patch by yourself in front of the mirror.
I usually wear it too to help me sleep at night, but it just looks like a sleeping mask. So it's a dual eye patch.
We actually produce sleeping masks with my face on the eye patch. we actually produced those.
I didn't know that, and I could have lived the rest of my life.
I'm going to send you one and sign it.
Please do. So what do we do now? Okay, first off, I'd say get rid of any self-imposed deadlines. Right? Why? There's already going to be enough stress and enough pressure involved in this. Why would you add a completely arbitrary timeline? Right. So get rid of that. I would listen to I've never sat down with the Joint Chiefs of Staff or the people who send ideas up the chain of command beyond a very slide deck that goes to the battle space commander that gets sent back and says, hey, your helicopters are facing the wrong direction, so fix those and I'll give you mission approval. But I would hope as the plans go higher up that the smartest heads we have around the table are putting together a plan to execute what you talked about, to get those people out of there. And there's no way that the best plan is just to stay geographically fixed to the Kabul airport, because people also need to realize this. Just because it hasn't become incredibly violent around Kabul, which is where the video cameras are for the news networks, does not mean that that is how the Taliban is behaving in the rest of Afghanistan. Look at what has happened in all of the cities that have fallen along the way, the execution of soldiers, both ANA and ANP. So there's and I'm sure the U.S. does this too. There's the face we'll put on when the video camera is up, and then there's the behavior when the video camera is off. So realize that as well. But if we're fixing ourselves only to the airport, which is where all of the cameras are, it's not a great policy. I think
there's U.S. citizens outside Kabul. I mean, there's U.S. citizens all over the country. If that's going to be our priority, and we still have not authorized any kind of rescue missions. And again, so I don't know why that would be the case. Neither you and I are sitting at the table for those conversations, even though I would love to be a fly on the wall, because what I've still never been able to figure out looking back at my military career is, what are the conversations around the cost? Let's say, I'm just curiosity, let's use a drone strike as an example. Let's say we have a high value target, but he's surrounded by 5 innocent family members. Mm-hmm. That's not worth it. Or let's say that is worth it. But what about 10? What about 15? I'd love to be around these conversations where they have the conversations about what's the acceptable risk and what's the acceptable cost, because I feel like that's probably what they're talking about now. Hey, if we authorize people to go off of the Kabul airport, what's the risk? How many lives are going to be lost? And I'm just really curious as to what decision makers actually talk about in those moments and what the math they actually use is, because I've never heard it openly and transparently explained to myself as somebody who used to be on the action end of that. But it's a good question. What I want to see is the politicians, this is the president, simply authorize these things and say, look, military, now you figure out whether it makes sense from a cost benefit ratio.
Yeah.
Because only the guys on the ground, only the military can really answer that question and assess their own risks. The president can't possibly do that, right? He's not close to the situation, and he certainly in particular doesn't have the background to do that. But you at least have to give permission for the analysis to occur. And that's the first step. Give permission for the military to even think about it. And
I hope, empowering your subordinates, he should not. It's another thing I think is interesting. People are like, the president has to be the smartest person in the room. Like, really? What if he was not the smartest person in the room, but he had the, he's like, Avengers assemble and put together the most amazing team of the smartest people. I would hope he's already made that decision, right? Because that's going to have to happen whether any action is taken in the first place, or the decision to whether or not you're going to take action or not is going to occur. I would have to hope that that's already happened.
Yeah. I kind of want to ask you what you've been doing ever since the SEAL teams. We brushed past your impressive bio a little bit at the beginning because we wanted to get right into the meat of the conversation. Obviously, we talked a little bit about how you and I met. But tell us about, unless there's a few things you want to keep adding to the Afghanistan conversation. But
the only thing I can add to it is I don't have the solutions. I'm detached. It's tough to see what's going on. Maybe taking Bagram is this a short-term solution? I have no idea. But what I do know is that we could have done way better on the execution of this plan, or paused the plan and created a better one. And for that, the people holding the bag on that need to be held responsible. But let's not forget what happened in the years leading up to it as well. I mean, other than that, I don't know what to say about Afghanistan. It's
depressing for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Because like while I don't feel like my service was in vain by any stretch, it's depressing to me because it was just such an unnecessary folly. It really was. Like we didn't have to leave this way at all. At the very least, we could have. A lot of us. There's been bipartisan outrage against the administration for months, actually, because they haven't been processing SIVs. You know, that's just one thing. There was clearly no plan for American citizens. But I still tell people, if you bring the troop levels down to zero, you will create a power vacuum, and the Taliban will run through the country. You know, it's just a matter of time. And people are like, well, we didn't know it'd be this fast. Okay, well, in 6 months from now? And in the end, you're going to end up with a situation where the Taliban are back in control, and we're right back to a pre-9/11 situation. And I can't say this enough. And the question has always been, at what cost do we think we can take to prevent that terrorist safe haven? Because there's a cost to it. And I think for 20 years we tried to figure out what that cost would be. And sometimes it got really expensive, and then we called it nation building. But then in the last few years, it really wasn't that expensive. It was actually a very small commitment that maintained a stalemate. And a stalemate might be the best thing that we can hope for in a place like Afghanistan. And I think that's why I'm so frustrated, because I've been saying this for a long time, but I think we let emotions have the best of us and make policy for us. So that's my, I guess, last feelings about it. But let's talk about you. Let's talk about you in the limited time we have left. How much time do you have left?
I don't know. It's your show.
Well, yeah, but you got to go. Okay, I think we're good. Andy, what have you been doing? Tell me about your podcast, and I know the audience will probably enjoy listening to it. And you've you're involved in quite a few things. So, and I won't do justice to it trying to give some kind of bio for you. So, give me a sense of why you got out of the SEAL teams and what you've been doing since.
Yeah, well, getting out of the SEAL teams wasn't necessarily my choice. My medical record and my body were like, hey, we think we're done here. And it also didn't help when I got back from that last tour in 2010. And although I had been filling a leadership role, you knew this and know this as well as I, on a fit rep or an eval, if the right box is not checked, it doesn't really matter what you did, because for your next advancement selection, you either have the box checked or not. So I got back in 2010, and I was told by the officer detailer that although I was acting in the role of both an OIC and an operations officer, that it didn't count. So I would need to do back-to-back AOIC and then OIC deployments, and then find a joint tour. To which I responded, is there any other option available for that? Because my body is trashed. I've already done 8 deployments. I don't feel like doing another 3 with my kids at the age that they are at. And in the back of my mind, I didn't think I was going to be physically able to do it, because there is some pretty severe residual nerve damage, at least from the gunshot wound in Iraq. And it makes, being the physical weak link on the ground, especially in a leadership position, is a recipe for absolute failure. I would not be able to live with myself if I was ever to be in a place and because of a physical limitation, somebody that I was with either got hurt or killed. I would not be able to tolerate that. So I was medically retired. I was actually 5 days from getting out of the military with no retirement of any kind. And a doctor was like, hey, yeah, I'm not signing this discharge physical. You need to go out to NICO, the National Intrepid Center of Excellence. And I went to the one at Walter Reed and did a full diagnostic and workup, and it ended up getting medically retired. So it wasn't really my choice to leave, but it was definitely my time to leave. And worked for a strength and conditioning company after that. Did some aviation stuff. I did some charter flying. I started public speaking towards the end of my military career. About 4.5 years ago, I was really lucky. Got introduced to our mutual friend Joe Rogan as a guest on his podcast, because I was trying to do some fundraising to raise money for the Navy SEAL Foundation through some skydiving. And we just, you know this as well as I do. People ask all the time, what's Joe like? I'm like, he's like what he's like on his show. There's just no microphone. He's just an awesome, grounded down dude. And he's like, hey man, he's like, you're good at talking. you should start a podcast, which I come to find out he tells everybody. So I feel far less special than I used to. He's like the man who has spawned a million podcasts. I swear to God, he's like the pod father. And so I started the podcast with no real idea of where it was going to go. And it's become one of the most cathartic things that I've ever done. I'm fascinated by other people and things that they do. So I get to sit down and talk with people from our, like guys like Jason Tushin or Jason Gardner or Jocko, and sit down and just have conversations and explore similarities and differences in beliefs and backgrounds and who I am as a person, why I wanted to do the things that I do or have done in the past or want to do in the future, and just hear about incredible stories from other service members, from other services, from female veterans. So it started off as like, I should probably listen to Joe, I guess, because I guess his podcast is reasonably successful. And then, currently now, I've actually backed away from a lot of the stuff that I used to do because the pandemic highlighted for me how much I hate traveling. So I'm trying to actually stay home and maximize what I do at home, where I live in northwestern Montana, and been talking with guys like Evan Hafer. I'm going to open up a Black Rifle Coffee franchise in town and throw my hat into the ring. And on Saturdays, people can come in and order whatever they want, and I'm going to give them drip coffee regardless of what their order is. The thing that I like to do.
That does sound awesome. Those guys are great. I've had them on the show a couple times as well. It's funny how veterans like you and them. I was just thinking about this as you mentioned, Black Rifle Coffee guys that get like they're a coffee company, and yet they get blasted in the political spectrum oftentimes. And again, because I don't know, because you can, for the Second Amendment types, like you can never be Second Amendment enough, and like these guys have probably done more for normalizing gun culture than anybody else ever has, and yet they get blasted for the dumbest stuff. The dumbest stuff. How much do you get into politics? This is a political podcast, and we talked about policy a little bit. How much do you get into politics on at least in your daily life, in your show? What questions would you have of me? What criticisms might you have of me? Since you're my old instructor, you might as well just lay into me, Andy.
That was never my style. If I wanted people to listen, I would talk quietly, so they would have to listen more intently.
You were definitely the disappointed dad.
For sure. That's what worked for you guys. Like I said, the hammer of justice is not always the best tool. It's actually been interesting watching your entry into politics, which I'm pretty sure I tried to talk you out of the instant that you first told me you were considering it. I'm like, no, Dan, no. It's you have definitely become more partisan as well. And I don't say that negatively. I think politics in general have become much more partisan. And I think it's actually getting people to tune out more than to actually tune in, because you know what people are going to say. It'll be people pointing at the left and the right. And oftentimes I think the subject matter is lost along the way. And I don't know how to correct for that. But politics for me right now, I'm already seeing signs for like Trump 2024. And here's the thing. People can think what they want to about Trump. It's not a statement about that. For me, it's this sense of doom that the next election cycle is around the corner, because I'm still not ready to deal with that again. I don't want to be bombarded for 2 years leading up to it. And my biggest concern, and maybe you would have an answer for this, I have a lot of worries about our country, and I don't think we're at the brink. People are talking about civil war and being at the brink. Easy to say the actuality of that actually happening. I'm not so sure, because people, their thought of what a war in the streets looks like and the actual execution of a war in the streets are two very different things. But I don't know if our country would survive another election cycle where there's no faith in the process in itself. If there's no way to restore faith in the actual electoral process, that I think might be something that would trend us toward that. And you're living in that system. How do we recover that faith for people? Because both sides are basically saying it's flawed. There's different arguments about what had happened, but at the end of the day, it's causing people, I think, to question the validity of a very sacred process in our country. And I don't know how we recover that before 2024.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. So, on the election stuff, like the left says there's voter suppression. The left says that the Russians colluded with Trump and that, his election was illegitimate. and then obviously everything that happened with Trump's with the 2020 election. The accusations of widespread fraud and systemic fraud. Algorithms that change the ballots and such. So, just you're right. But the important thing to remember is it undermines faith, and faith is pretty important. So, I always take a step back on this particular issue and say, look, an election is a competition, and in any competition, you need really strict rules that everybody agrees upon, and then you need to be able to audit the results afterwards in a coherent manner. Like it can't be this mess that it's been in a lot of states, and audits should just be par for the course. It's unclear to me why we wouldn't always audit elections in Texas. I think that's normal practice, and so there's that's the conservative argument for elections, because I'm like, look, because the left will say, well, why don't you just want to make it easier to vote? And my answer is, well, it's already really easy to vote. And also, like, I want it to be easier to score a touchdown. We can't just expand the end zone. It's just, like, again, there are rules, and let's just follow the rules and make sure that we at least agree on the outcome. It's easy to vote. To say it's not easy to vote, I think is ridiculous. So, look, from a policy perspective, obviously, I think I'm right on this, and I think Democrats are wrong. But I also don't necessarily agree with all the rhetoric that's been used on our side either. I just think it pulls away from the core of our argument, which is you have to have an election that has integrity, that you can trust, which is truly the core. And I think there's a good moral argument for that. Just that simple statement of make sure the rules of the game are structured well, strict, and well followed, and that can be audited afterwards. That should be a very simple thing. On the polarization issue, I think it's worth addressing, because it's certainly a question I get asked a lot. Like, Dan, how do we pull people together? How do we stop being so partisan? And, well, look, what I try to do is at least help you understand why I'm so much against the left. Because what I think people find unfortunate is when you just rely on kind of shallow talking points, or just name calling, or the tit for tat. Like, well, they're bad because Hillary Clinton's corrupt. Well, that's not why they're bad. That's why Hillary's bad. But it's not why everybody's bad. It's just like we're not bad because you don't like the way Trump tweets. Like, that's a ridiculous statement. What I think is wrong with the other side is simply their ideas. And we have to be talking about ideas a little bit more. And then also, I would say the second thing is, it is the nature of politics to debate ideas, and to debate those ideas fiercely. It is the entire point. And so partisanship is inherent in the system of politics. It always will be. And it's like the question of Afghanistan, really. It's if you don't like that, then, well, what's the alternative? Because the question is always, well, compared to what? Compared to what? And I think we're always going to be in a situation, we always have been in a situation in any kind of democracy, where there are groups that disagree with each other and disagree with each other fiercely. And I think what we need to agree on is the structures of our republic that allow us to disagree in at least the most peaceful manner possible. When I get really amped up is when people start to threaten those structures. Things like packing the Supreme Court, removing the filibuster, basically turning us into a mob democracy, which is what our founders never intended to happen. A mob democracy is so dangerous. I mean, the idea that we might make extraordinary policy decisions off of a simple majority is a very scary place to be. You don't want to be there. And if you're asking me, I think that's how we got to this Afghanistan issue. Really, I think that's how this decision got made so hastily, was because it was based on that sort of feeling. It was based on a very crude look at what the public might think. Because most people will say, if you ask them a simple question, should we leave Afghanistan? Yeah, we should leave. That's what they say. Now, if you ask them a few more questions, like, well, what if it will create a terrorist safe haven? What about a residual security force? They might be like, yeah, leave a residual security force.
This question, can you point to it on a map?
Yeah, that's always a good one as well. And it's like, yeah, should we be basing serious discussions off of that? I'm kind of going on a tangent there, but that would, I guess, be my response to a lot of what you said. I think the best thing we can.
Are you enjoying being and doing what you're doing?
It's not enjoyable the way like SEAL teams were enjoyable. Like you, I kind of left kicking and screaming. I I wasn't allowed to really deploy anymore. I mean, I deployed a couple more times after I was injured, but in the more of in kind of an intelligence capacity. Yeah. Not because I'm so intelligent. I mean, obviously I am, Andy, but
we're using that term loosely. You meant the military terminology, not, of course, the individual reflective terminology.
Well, clearly I meant both, but it's neither here nor there. But I did a couple more deployments, but then they were like, you have half an eye, like you need to get out of the military. And so, there I went. So it's not enjoyable in that sense because I truly, I never saw the military as service, the way we're thanked for our service.
Oh, for sure. Hey, every penny I've ever made in my life, I would give right back just to go back and do what we used to do.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us feel that way. So it's, but politics it's important. It's important to be part of a conversation, that affects Americans' lives. And so it's fulfilling in that sense, which I might say is a more pure form of joy. It's not joy in the fun sense, but I do make it fun. I mean, obviously I do a lot of kind of things that normal politicians don't do. And we do that because, look, Americans have to see you having some fun. You'll go crazy in this job if you don't try to have some fun. I do this podcast because it's the only place that you can have those more in-depth conversations, because like I can tweet about things. I can put out short videos on Instagram. You can't put out long videos on Instagram until people watch them. So you have to do a podcast. And that's why, normally we will deep dive with somebody into a wide variety of subjects, whether it's healthcare, environmental issues, housing issues. I mean, I think we've done literally everything on the podcast at a certain point, bring on experts to talk about that. Then you can really start to unpack things and help people understand, why I take the positions I do. And that's my main goal in politics. Help people understand why I take the positions I do. And people appreciate that even if they disagree with it. Like, at least you're directly confronting the ideas you disagree with, because oftentimes people just talk past each other, or say, oh, they're just bad. They're just bad. And they want bad things. Okay, well, why are they bad? It's not hard to explain why. Let's just explain why and why it doesn't work.
And I think it's important to remember, too, that you can disagree with people's ideas and still wrap your arms around them as a fellow American. It's my dad and I passionately disagree on many things, and we use many colorful words and phrases when we're passionately discussing things. And at the end of the day, I love him more after those discussions. That's one thing that I hope we can navigate our way around to, is the realization that, yes, there are bad people out there, and of course there are a variety of bad ideas, but they're not always joined at the hip. You can have people who are, maybe they're less educated on a topic, or maybe their upbringing was different and they believe something different than you, but that doesn't inherently make them a bad person. And they may well end up being your neighbor. And that's the person you're probably going to rely upon when things go south. And guess what? The government is not there to help you, but your neighbors will be.
Yeah, I think that's an important lesson that a lot of people need to learn right now. We've really gotten to this point in politics where the other side is evil. Now, conservatives feel this way more than most. We've always felt like we think that liberals are wrong, but they think we're evil. And I'm not even sure how you identify. I mean, I don't pay attention to your politics that much.
That in 2021?
Sorry?
Are you even allowed to ask me that in 2021? I feel like that was racist.
That's a good point.
I don't follow politics incredibly closely. I would say I would probably identify more along the lines of a libertarian. I would fiscally conservative and socially liberal on a lot of issues, and then some I completely flip-flop. And my biggest thing is I want to be able to go out and live my life to its fullest, and I don't want people pushing shit on me. And I think people should largely be able to do what they want to do,
Yeah. That's a good view to have. And I think things get dangerous when we can't have that live and let live philosophy. That's when people start talking about these sort of extraordinary Civil War measures. When we're starting to really infringe on the ability of others to be free, even if we don't like how they're acting, we don't like what they're saying, we don't like what they're doing. And then
how arrogant does somebody have to be to think they're going to go through life and never be offended by something that happens to them or something that's said, or not ever be exposed to an idea that grates against them? It's like, get over it. That's the beauty of our society, is that we can have those things, and people that irritate you could live to your left and right and you can still figure out a way to come together as a community. I mean, just stop being so sensitive.
Yeah, we have a lot of sensitivity in America these days.
I can't believe you offended me. It's like, really? I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, why would you ever think that that's not going to happen at some point in your life? Like, grow up.
It's a moniker of living in a free society, and you have to live with some kind of offense in a free society, and you have to be able to deal with it. And you have to be proud. Here's the thing: you got to be proud of being able to deal with it. And I think that's what's changed, where we've sort of elevated this sense of victimhood as like a heroic attribute in our society, where the person who gets the welfare benefit, the person who fought to get their services given to them, is now a hero, which is just not how Americans used to be. And I think that's strange. Or the person who fights to expose how they were offended is now seen as a hero. And I'm like, what is heroic about this? Because the heroic to me would be letting it roll off your back and then demonstrating that you're stronger for it. That would be a traditional heroic attribute or heroic way of thinking, a heroic character. And we've kind of flipped these things on their head to where people actually have an incentive to be victimized or at least claim victimhood. And it's a very dangerous path. And it, again, from a political perspective, I see that pathology in American culture leading to the policies that I disagree with, be it socialism or something akin to that, and the reasoning is quite simple. If you're not strong enough to live in a free society, and right, everything offends you, and you're clamoring for somebody to take care of you, you're clamoring for a politician to give you things, to take from somebody else and to give you things, to take the responsibility that you don't want to take, you do end up with a very socialized society. You end up with which I believe is unsustainable. I mean, it's inherently unsustainable. It's never worked, as it turns out. Never worked. And I think that's a dangerous path to go down, even if it's tempting for so many people, because it does feel good.
In the short term.
Everything, yeah. Lots of things feel good in the short term.
Yeah.
Andy, I know you got to go soon, and appreciate you and your insights on everything our country's going through right now. And
I have no insights. Let's be clear for the listeners. I have my own thoughts.
You had lots of insights.
I have, there's a reason I used to have a blog called Confessions of an Idiot, and there's a reason why I titled it that. So,
well, I'm glad we were able to do this because we've been trying to do it for a while, and this was a much better topic to land on. You do have good insights, I think, thoughtful discussions about the complexities of what our country's going through right now. So we do appreciate that. You actually never said the name of your podcast, but it's Cleared Hot.
Correct.
I believe, and you've got a super cool high-speed picture of you skydiving, right, as your logo. Yes.
Speaking of skydiving, I swear if you're going to do another one of those campaign, you're jumping. We need to link up and go into the wind tunnel because it was hard to watch. All right.
You didn't see my second one. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's just address this. So there's a little bit of potato chipping going on. All right. It lasted for a second. I was just like, oh, come on, guys. You could have gotten the footage where I was much more stable. Did you see the Georgia one where I was totally stable? It was a perfect jump. So let's just.
Trash. It was trash.
No, you didn't see the second one.
Backsliding the whole time. It's fine. It is what it is.
Not backsliding. Was not backsliding. God, you're such an elitist. Get out of here with your squirrel suit. Yeah. You probably jump in tights. So whatever.
I have before. Don't judge me. You can't actually judge me. It's 2021. I can jump in whatever I want.
Yeah, and I can identify as whoever I want while I jump, and I can change my mind as soon as I land.
Yeah, that is.
Well, this went off the rails quick.
Well, hey. I appreciate your time, and yeah, I got to hop in to check out a hotel and go do some jiu-jitsu. So I appreciate it. Let's do it again in the future for sure.
Absolutely, Andy. Thanks for being on, and again, thanks for your insights. They were helpful. We appreciate you.
Right on, man. Have a good one.
Later.
Later.